So energy is the currency of life. And when your body has enough energy, it does all of the maintenance tasks if you get it the right signals from the environment. But if your body doesn't have enough energy, it'll say, well, what's the least important maintenance task? And it'll stop doing that. Same thing with your car. What's the least important thing if you're really on a budget? You're probably not going to change your wiper blades because they just don't matter that much. You can still drive, except it sucks. And sometimes you might hit a tree because you couldn't see anything, right? So we want you to have enough energy so that you can, at the end of the day, go, that was a great day. I handled everything that came my way, including the 3 unexpected things. And I folded every protein perfectly, and I performed my autophagy to get rid of the weak parts of my power systems, and I got rid of zombie cells, and I did all the other anti-aging things. Oh, and then I had sex for 3 hours. Like, that's what high energy looks like. But not a lot of people are there anymore, and I certainly spent a lot of my life not being there. So, to summarize the things you want to know here, let's just start. I mentioned this yesterday. Removing friction is much easier. Imagine that you had a pickup truck, and the bed of the truck is full of bags of sand. And you take it into one of those car customization places, like, I want a faster truck. Now, they could say, well, let's put a bigger engine in that. But what they're going to tell you first is maybe you should get that shit out of the back of your truck because it weighs so much, it's not going to be very fast. So removing the friction from your life is so much easier than trying to do stuff that's going to have you make more energy. And this isn't what we're usually taught. You're like, just work harder. Come on, you could do, pick up one more curl. That's not how it really works. So one of the biggest sources of friction in the modern world, one that our ancestors knew about very well, is called anti-nutrients. And if you've been following my work for a long time, going back to 2012, the first chapter of the Bulletproof Diet, I talked about these 5 categories of anti-nutrients. One of them was lectins, and lectins have had their day in the sun. Dr. Gundry's done a great job of talking about this. What lectins are very simple molecules. They are proteins that stick to certain kinds of sugar. Now, your body makes more than 1,000 lectins, types of lectins, every day as part of biological processes. They are not bad. But if your body makes the kind of sugars, maybe on your joints, that certain plant compounds stick to, when you eat those plants, they will fuck you up. And the person sitting next to you will eat the same plant, and they'll say, that was delicious, and I'm completely fine. Like, wow. So sometimes it's really severe, and you know it. Other times, I don't know, my back always hurts when I wake up, and I have this weird stuff on my skin, and I can't solve it. Like, well, maybe you should look at lectins, which are a part of the anti-nutrient complex, but not all lectins are bad, and you may not be sensitive to the lectins. Another, I'm going to call it an anti-nutrient right now, is omega-6 fats. These are the plant-based oils that they've been trying to sell as healthy since the invention of Crisco. Crisco was invented, not the brand name, but the substance, by Napoleon. He needed fat to feed his troops. So it's like, oh, what's the cheapest thing we can feed our soldiers? So they figured out how to hydrogenate oils, and we've been doing it ever since. But what you end up with is the idea that whether they're hydrogenated or they're just that good-for-you canola oil stuff, which is also known as rapeseed oil. Rapeseed oil isn't very good for marketing, so they renamed it to Canada oil. Canola, that's where it came from. And it was an industrial lubricant because you cannot eat this until you go through many steps of processing. And you say, okay, who cares? It's processed, but if it's an oil that's good for me, here's what happens when you eat these fats. Throughout the course of a year, we have our seasons. During the time of year where you fatten up for winter, you eat more and more polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. This is what makes bears hibernate. If you give bears butter, they won't hibernate and get fat. If you give them lots of nuts, they will hibernate and get fat. They don't tell you this, but omega-6 oils slow your metabolism. And you need some, about 1.6% of your fat if you eat grass-fed beef, and about 1.6% of your fat when you're really healthy is going to be there at various levels at different parts of the body. So when you believe that plant-based oils are somehow good for you, even though your body isn't made out of plant-based oils, what that does is that slows your metabolism. And that's one of the reasons that the French paradox isn't a paradox at all. The French paradox was, why do French people not get fat when they eat so much butter? Because the belief was that butter makes you fat. It should be called the American paradox, which is, why don't Americans eat like French people? And it wasn't the wine, it was the butter. And if you're going to eat a croissant made with canola oil or some other sort of weird oil versus one made with butter, they have a fundamentally different metabolic effect. So this is why you don't eat the salad dressing at the restaurant. This is why if it's fried at a restaurant, you just don't eat it, unless they have duck fat fries, or they cook in palm oil, or there's a new company, and one I'm really stoked about, called Zero Acre Farms that makes cultured oil. This is a fermentation-based oil that's free of omega-6s, and it lasts twice as long as canola oil in a fryer, and it costs half as much. So this is a company that will be putting millions of acres of farmland back to prairie land because we simply need less acreage to make oils that we can eat. That's something that I'm super excited about. But for you, go to a restaurant, if it's cooked in oil and you didn't tell them cook it in butter, it's probably actually not food anymore because they're going to load you up with fats that make you fat. In one of my books, this one is Not Smarter, Not Harder, I talk about omega-6 oils, and there's now studies of where oils go in the body. It's not like you eat it and it just sort of randomly smears itself throughout your body. Your white fat, if you have love handles, it is most sensitive to what you eat. So the more restaurant food you eat, the more of that goes into your white fat cells. The more white fat cells you have, the more estrogen you make. The more dysregulated your metabolism. So maybe it just makes sense to modify the ratio of oils. So if you want to remove friction from your life, eat less omega-6 oils, and that'll work really well. In the Quest, I believe we have a copy of the Bulletproof Diet and the Fasting Roadmap that shows you which oils are better, and even shows you which foods are high in lectins. Can anyone name a very high lectin food? Lentils, tomatoes? Yes. Peanuts. Peanuts are very high. Turns out grains, nuts, seeds, and the deadly nightshade family, where belladonna is from. That would include, unfortunately, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and my favorite food on earth, peppers. My family has the genetics. We are sensitive to nightshades. Other people don't necessarily have that. In fact, my daughter didn't get that gene. So my son came home from school in first grade, "Dad, my neck really hurts. Will you rub it for me?" I said, and it was doing this every night for a month. So I went to the school and said, "What are you doing?" "Are you feeding him potatoes?" Because he and I have that genetics. And they said, "Oh no, we fish them out of the soup before we give it to him." So I said, "Well, let's change that." And a week later, his neck pain went away and didn't come back. So my daughter happily eats potatoes all day long, and my son goes, "I don't eat those because I don't like to hurt." I had arthritis diagnosed when I was 14 because I didn't know this, and I was in constant pain all up and down my back. All my joints hurt all the time because for me, that was a major source of friction. And this is why it gets tough. We're not meat robots. We're not all wired the same. And if you come from a part of the world where your ancestors ate lentils for thousands of years, you probably tolerate them pretty well, unless one of your ancestors mated with a Norwegian, in which case you don't know. But you might want to try to either test it just by eliminating high lectin foods and then eating a bunch of them and see if you wake up the next morning going, "Oh wow, that's right, I have brain fog again. I didn't realize I felt so much better." So your job is to be curious about, how do I feel? And the easiest thing to do is go on a relatively low complexity diet that doesn't contain all of the trigger foods. And when you do that, you're like, "Oh, I feel really different. Or you could be one of the lucky people in the room who's like, I didn't feel any difference at all. Like, good for you. But if you don't know what the friction is and you're doing it every day, imagine you're Superman. And you're like, I've got superpowers. I can look through your clothes. I can burn holes in walls. And then Lois Lane gets the kryptonite perfume and starts wearing it. Like, I don't know. It's just like my laser's a bit dimmer today. I just must be getting old. It's just a slow decline. It's because you're getting exposed every day and you don't know it. Another massively important and underrated anti-nutrient, and I'm working hard in the world of biohacking to bring this into our awareness, is called phytic acid. Now, why would you care about that? It's because phytic acid sucks minerals out of your body. It's a plant defense compound. You have to imagine plants, they run the F words too. You guys remember the F words in order? First one's fear. What's the second one? Food, thank you. Third one? Fucking, I knew you guys would get that one. Fourth one? Friend. Fifth one? Forgiveness. All right, you guys are good students. So, plants follow the same actual rules, including forgiveness, believe it or not. So what that means is the fear part, run away from, kill, or hide from scary things. You're a plant. Running is hard when you have roots. So you can't do that, which means your strategy is kill or hide. And you hide by putting a shell around the walnut, by having heavy bark on your tree, or by killing. You know, I'll put some toxic compounds in here and those bugs won't eat me. Any mammal that eats me, if they eat too much of me, they will start to die so I can live. And if they eat a little bit of me, maybe they can get away with it. So that's how Mother Nature creates balance in the world. And it actually is very, very logical. Is anyone curious why I said plants can do forgiveness? All right, I saw a few question marks there. We all have to do some mushrooms. I'm kidding. When I wrote my book on fasting, actually, many years before I wrote my book on fasting, in 2008, I felt called to do a vision quest. So I found a shaman outside Sedona who dropped me off in a cave for 4 days with no food and no people, so I could experience loneliness and hunger at the same time and show myself that I wouldn't actually die. And she told me a story. She took me out into her corral where she kept albino camels and alpacas. Shamans are weird, by the way, if you didn't know. And she said, do you see those thorn trees? I said, yeah. She said, go look at them. There's no thorns. I said, well, how did you do that? She said, I went and I meditated with the tree and I told it it was safe and it dropped all the thorns. So plants, when they feel safe, they make less toxins. They're less aggressive, the same as us, which is remarkable. Another example of that is coffee. You've probably heard of Robusta coffee beans. These are the gross ones that Folgers uses. They're a smaller bean. They're much higher in toxins because there's more insects. The more insects there are, the more aggressive plants are at making compounds that they use to hold back the world. So the more stressed a plant is, the more toxins it'll have, or in the case of some plants, the better it'll be for you. So if it's a plant that manufactures a polyphenol you use and you stress the plant a little bit, it'll make a lot more polyphenols. This is why chili peppers, if you don't water them very much, they get really hot. And if you water them a lot, they're mild, because they're reacting to the environment the same way your body does, which I think is really cool. Like, life always follows those 4 F words, no matter 5 F words, no matter what you do, because that's the algorithm of life itself. And it's really cool. And when you understand that, all of these steps to energy success make a huge amount of sense. Another source of friction for people that is becoming more known, especially post-COVID, is histamine-rich foods. Histamine-rich foods happen not usually because the food itself has histamine, but because when foods start to spoil, microbes take action, and microbes make histamine to keep other microbes away. So those 2-day-old leftovers that you ate, they didn't taste that good, but especially if they contained fish or pork or soy, if you eat them and you're just tired afterwards, and you're like, I need an extra cup of coffee and some sugar, It's because you got a dose of histamine, and histamine makes you tired. Or if you had COVID and had longer COVID, you're like, wow, now I have really strong symptoms and I'm super tired, maybe I'm starting to cough. That's because histamine in foods can be a trigger for some people, and if you have the right enzymes in your liver and you don't have an overactive system because of an infection, like toxic mold will do that as well, then you'd be fine on that. So one person can eat the leftovers, for the next person, they're a major source of friction. Because I grew up in a basement with toxic mold, I had toxic mold-induced brain damage, I have an overactive, it's called a mast cell system. So I know, for me, histamine foods like soy sauce, fermented soy, fish sauce, and leftover meat, if I eat those, I'm probably not going to feel good. In fact, if I do eat those, I take a quarter of a Benadryl and then I can eat them because I know what's going on. If I take a whole Benadryl, I just want to take a nap, right? So you can balance the amount of antihistamine you take with those foods. But if you didn't know, you're like, well, I don't know, sometimes I eat and I feel like shit. And then I eat the same thing the next day and I don't feel like shit. Like, what is going on here? What's going on here is there was an anti-nutrient from microbes trying to protect themselves, and they're basically saying, that's my cheese. And you're saying, no, that's my cheese. And then, well, it depends on the quality of your gut and your genetics. So this is why it's not the same for all of us, but your job is to be curious. Just take note. If you have sugar cravings, or you're just profoundly tired after a meal, like, oh my God, take notes. What was in the meal? How is it prepared? And all of a sudden you're gonna realize there's a pattern here. The other thing that is a real serious problem for us is glyphosate. Glyphosate is something that we spray now all over the planet. It's incredibly toxic for soil. The levels that are allowed today, 1/300th of those levels is enough to cause seizures in earthworms. So when they spray glyphosate, they're sterilizing the soil, which is completely unacceptable and actually will lead to the destruction of the planet if we allow them to continue. It's that big of a deal. Fortunately, it breaks down over time. So glyphosate does something else pretty evil. It sticks to minerals so they are not bioavailable. And what they do in the US particularly is at the end of the season when they're growing grains, especially wheat, they spray glyphosate on the crop, which kills the plant. And the plants are like, oh no, there's a sudden lack of minerals, I've been poisoned, I will put all of my energy into my babies. So it causes a surge of growth in the wheat kernels, and they can harvest it 2 weeks early. And then they feed it to you. Or they feed it to grain-fed animals that you eat. So glyphosate is something that may be affecting your gut, and if you're eating things with glyphosate in it, it is also sticking to your minerals, and your job is to get enough minerals. And speaking of minerals, I started talking about phytic acid, but I didn't tell you the full story. Phytic acid that you find in the plant-based foods, whole foods especially, oats are a great example of this, rice cakes are a great example of this, corn flakes are a great example of this. Phytic acid sucks minerals from us, but we don't really measure it or pay any attention to it. But farmers, especially ranchers, they know. If they give corn and soy and grains to animals with too much phytic acid, the animals can't reproduce. The animals don't grow. They break their bones. Their hooves fall apart. So and by the way, cows with 3 stomachs, they can handle a large amount of phytic acid. We don't make the enzymes that allow you to turn this off. So when they have too much phytic acid, they add an enzyme to break it down so the cows can eat even more of the junk food for cows without breaking their bones. They don't care about you because they don't do that for us. Traditional preparation techniques for grains, like sourdough, for instance, that removes a substantial amount of phytic acid. But even soaking things overnight can help, or a little bit of sprouting. All of those are time-intensive processes, and our industrial companies don't like it. Does anyone know why cornflakes was invented? I'm guessing someone here knows. Oh my gosh. What do you think?
So the version of the story that I know is that cornflakes could decrease sexual drive.
Yes.
in men. And so the idea is that from the, forgot the name of the...
Dr. Kellogg.
Dr. Kellogg had this idea that what was messed up about humanity was a uncontrollable sex drive. And so he came up with a product that people would have during breakfast.
Yes.
That would solve the problem by decreasing testosterone levels and make people feel less like having sexual
Exactly.
intercourse.
So Dr. Kellogg was a raging pervert. He liked forced enemas 10 times a day, and he was very opposed to masturbation. So he believed in circumcising men and women to prevent masturbation. Very few people were willing to do it to women, so he focused on men. And to this day, in the US, a lot of guys are circumcised because of what Dr. Kellogg did, because he was a fucking weirdo. Along the way, he said, oh, let's invent some foods that lower testosterone because, hey, sexual desire is the root of all evil. It's actually the root of all creation, guys. It's not the root of all evil. So he said, well, we can make cornflakes. Cornflakes are very high in phytic acid, which steals your zinc, which drops your testosterone. And they're high in a bunch of other bad stuff as well. And they just put it into marketing, using the magical power of marketing to take over your meat operating system to make you believe things that aren't true. Another one of his contemporaries was Graham. Graham crackers. These health foods are exactly the opposite of that. Fertile humans are healthy humans when they're at their ages, when they're appropriately fertile. People are losing their fertility more than ever before, and this just fundamentally false belief that plant-based foods are inherently good for you. 99% of plants on the planet will kill you or fuck you up if you eat them. I'm swearing a lot this morning. I need more nicotine. But this, by the way, is also plant-based. So I'll answer your question in a sec. So what's going on with all of this is that you got to know how it works. And we are having this incredible problem where people can't conceive. Healthy people in their 30s are just finding they can't do it. I just joined the advisory board of a company called Clockwise that's now measuring the endocrine disruptors you're exposed to. And when you stack that with a plant-based diet, bad things happen to your fertility, which means bad things happen to your creativity. That's actually the source of life. So I just want to caution you, those are anti-nutrients, and there are companies who will stare you right in the face, and they'll pay for all sorts of garbage studies, and they'll just tell you over and over and over that it's good for you because it's cheap to produce, it has a long shelf life, and they don't care about you. They care about the lowest cost food. And your job is to say, I am going to invest as much as is reasonable for me in quality foods that don't do that. So I look at cornflakes, I'm like, I can go 60 days without eating and I won't die. That's about as long as most people can go. I'm not eating that shit. I will just not eat. And because I've learned and I've taught my body carefully, I won't die if I don't eat, even though it feels like, oh my God, if I don't have lunch, I'm starving. None of that's real. So skip the stuff that's not actually food, even though it has a pretty box. And you might find massive things happen. Question here.
Thank you. That kind of just blew my mind, what you said about Dr. Kellogg's. And I had a question about cereals in general, like Cheerios and other types of cereals. Do they have the similar properties that I guess cornflakes have on your body?
Yeah, Cheerios are high in phytic acid and glyphosate. So here's the deal. No one on earth ate cereals for breakfast if they had a choice. So this is what you feed the peasants who are working your fields while you eat the bacon and eggs. This is history. This is gruel. This is literally what they would feed people even if they were slaves. This is the lowest quality, lowest cost, cheapest foods that are a source of calories because we need energy. But you want to take in energy that doesn't also steal stuff from you. So it's food free of these anti-nutrients that gives you power. But if you're starving, you can eat a lot of stuff. And over time in different cultures, because famines have been a part of our existence forever, they figured out, you know what? If you take that root and you boil it and you steam it, you leave it in the sun and you ferment it for a while, you can not die by eating that plant. Yes. And after a while, this is a sacred food for us because it's the thing that keeps us alive when we're going to die. But that doesn't mean it's good for you. And when, in all societies historically, when there is availability of high quality fats, they get prioritized. When indigenous people in America would kill a buffalo, they would eat all of it, but the two most important parts were the fatty hump on the back and the liver. The liver goes to the kids and the pregnant women first, for a reason. They did not give them corn as their primary thing because it's a superfood. It's not a superfood, and they knew it. And there are people trying to trick you into believing this. It just doesn't work. By the way, I was a devout vegan and then a raw vegan for a while, so I went down that path because I didn't understand this stuff, and I had to repair my biology after I did it. So I just want you guys to understand this is a source of friction in your life. If you're eating a bunch of foods that you think are healthy, but they're actually taking your minerals, you need minerals to make ATP. You need minerals for bone density. You need minerals to make your hormones. You need minerals for almost every enzyme in your body. And it's shocking what happens when you bring your mineral levels up. And back to glyphosate. How do you get rid of glyphosate in your body? Anybody know? There's this thing called humic and fulvic acid. I think it might be in Danger Coffee. There are some studies that show it helps to pull it out of the human body. Eating a diet higher in animal protein, and specifically the amino acid glycine that is found in collagen, is also a way to push glyphosate out of your body because the gly in glyphosate sticks to the gly in glycine when you're forming collagen. So you have 2 plates of food. They look pretty similar. One of them is relatively high in anti-nutrients. The other one isn't. They both taste good. If you know, I'll choose the one that tastes good and is good for me. So this is a major part of biohacking. It is the easiest thing to do versus doing things that make you stronger. Just stop things that make you weak.